I am a lifelong Sonic fan. Without this series, I definitely wouldn't be as into games as I am now, so I've got a lot to thank for Sonic, like crippling debt for buying too many games. If you've been with the channel for a while, or you know me, then you'll know that I find many good elements in Sonic games that the consensus says is bad. I think that there are very few outright bad Sonic games. And so, before Sonic Frontiers comes along, I wanted to look back at one game in particular. Because this is one Sonic game that I've outright never really enjoyed. Sonic Forces had a fair amount riding on it. The PS4 generation had gone 4 years with nothing. Not even a port of Sonic 1. There was absolutely nothing Sonic until 2017. What more, we were 6 years out from Generations, and sure, we had Lost World, and Boom in that time. Lost World I think has redeeming qualities, and Boom had a fun TV show. And so when that generation finally got its Sonic game, and the franchise returned to the scope we expected, I thought it was, like, okay. Those calling it the worst game ever probably hadn't played that many bad games, you know, it was just kind of, not exactly an exhilarating feeling after a 6-year wait. And you know, I've never really felt that about a Sonic game. I don't think 06 is good, but it didn't bore me. I thought Boom was very funny for reasons they probably didn't intend. Forces just left me feeling nothing. It was technically solid enough, it wasn't full of glitches, as a piece of functional media, it was fine, and little more than that. But perhaps I was letting my expectations get in the way of enjoying this game. I found enjoyment in many Sonic games that others seem to find bad. Surely there is something good here. We're now 5 years out from Forces, which means 11 years from Generations, good lord. So I wanted to fully return to Forces, finish the entire game again, play episode Shadow. I just want to give it a good, honest chance, and judge it for what it is, and not what it isn't. It can't be that bad. Well, I think my opinion's actually way worse than it used to be. I won't yap about the story too much, it's been done to death. Let's just say it's inconsistent and very tonally weird.
Sonic is gone, Amy, and Tails has just lost it.
Everything happens for a reason, right?
Truly a man in mental peril. Remember the Phantom Ruby from Mania? Well, these are a duology. Forces is a sequel to Mania. You didn't have to do Mania like that, man. This time the Ruby's power does many different things. Sometimes it can teleport, and sometimes it can warp dimensions. But mostly it powers the mysterious new enemy called Inferno, who works alongside Eggman. He can create armies of clones, distort reality, and has a really cool voice. But through the story, you can absolutely see where the game was rushed. Like the main clone army consists of Shadow, Zavok, Metal, Chaos, but like half of them don't do anything. The Shadow clone just gets defeated in a cutscene with the actual Shadow, and then there's no more relevance to that. And Chaos does nothing. Like, he reaches for Tails once, and then Classic Sonic comes in and stomps him, and then there's just no more Chaos. You didn't have to do adventure like that, man. They gave Zavok his own boss battle. Stop trying to make Zavok a thing. Oh yeah, the ultimate kart racing team. We've got Eggman, Metal Sonic, and Zavok. Unstoppable. I hate him so much. It is a confused story that feels like each page is written by different people. Sometimes it's trying to tell a dead serious story about overthrowing an empire. And in the next scene, everyone's just unbelievably upbeat. But I am not here to talk about the story. It's not good. I don't care that much. Let's talk about the game itself. 5 years on, I think I can confidently say my feelings about this game are not about meeting expectations. Sonic Forces is just extremely plain, at times confusing, but just sort of painfully average. We're back to the boost formula from Colors, Unleashed, and Generations, but it feels immediately different. You know, I think there are people who struggle with Boost Sonic, and any Sonic game to be honest. Like any off-screen gameplay you see at a convention has people playing like this. Having fun there? So Sonic Forces takes control of itself more than any other Boost game. I don't just mean like how sometimes in Generation there's a set piece we were just meant to sort of boost and not really interact. Nah, I mean sometimes the game outright disables your control or alters how Sonic moves so there's no room for error. But even then, there's somehow still room for error. Notice how I stopped boosting when going through this loop-de-loop? I haven't let go of the boost button. It's legitimately stopped me. Same here, same here, same here. Even in the scripted sequences of other Boost Sonics, you had some layer of control, but it's just so rigid here. Even if boosting had no impact on the speed, just show me some kind of effect, let me feel like I'm in control. Let me be a man! It's so jarring looking to go from this high-speed gameplay to just watching Sonic slowly go around a loop. And there's a ton of segments that outright change how Sonic is allowed to move. Like, watch here. I'm trying with all my might to move Sonic to the right, but he's just drawn to the center like a magnet. But in this example, I can just fully maneuver him around. It just feels like a drastic overcorrection to those who struggled with the older games. You're constantly fighting to actually be in control, and I think that's one of the key contributors to the game feeling like nothing. And there's one very specific section where the over-control just doesn't work for a turn. I can barely move out of the center, so no matter how much I turn, it's really tough not to fall off the stage here. I think this edge is placed here for Sonic to kind of pinball off to save him. It's very odd. They also give you a boost capsule right here, but if you use it, you die. Why? Not to just pile on specific problems, but sometimes you can't see what you're doing when you boost. Like, Jesus guys, pull the camera back a bit. And yeah, we're in Green Hill again! Whoa, there's flippin' 10 of them. 10. There's 10 Green Hills. You're probably bored of Green Hill. I'm definitely bored of Green Hill. Yeah, it's an iconic area, it's a neat bonus in Adventure 2, a fitting inclusion in Generations, it kinda makes sense again in Mania, but again in Forces? I think what makes this egregious is there just aren't that many stages in this game. There's 30 levels, but with so many of them falling into the exact same setting or being boss battles, you end up with only 7 actual zones, and you get through them so quickly. A lot are barely a minute long, most are barely 2 minutes long, and there's maybe a few 3-minute levels. So here are the zones. We've got Green Hill, there's Chemical Plant, yeah that's back again too. There's a city area, a neon forest, a futuristic white city, space, and a fortress. It's true that Colors also only has 7 stages, but they're so much more memorable, and 2 of them haven't been done to death. No more Green Hill. Frontiers, you're not listening to me. At least that's only seemingly a minor inclusion. But I'm not going to slander the length of the game too much. It is only a little over 3 hours long, but so are Colors and Generations. If you're not padding out an ultra-fast Sonic game with a slow character or going non-linear like Frontiers, then they're absolutely all going to be around this long. But as long as the quality is there, I think it's fine. The original Mega Drive games are also incredibly short, but I can't tell you how many times I've replayed them. I don't think it's right to criticize it for only being 3 hours long. It's what it does with that time that's worth criticizing. And it does nothing! Levels are over before they even make a statement, there's little to no variety, and I literally just played the game and I can barely remember most of the stages, they just blur into one. There's just very little incentive to come back, and the game itself feels like it's built to discourage coming back. Like, this little segment with the robot is kinda cool the first time, but it's a completely scripted, unskippable 30-second segment in a level. But even with this confusing approach to interactivity, the game does have a lot to do for completionists, like way too much. HowLongToBeat.com says 100% is around 25 hours, and that's like 10 times how long the game actually takes to finish. They've got all these daily challenges like a mobile game, and some achievements are nuts. I've played the game on Xbox twice, and I am not even close to getting 100,000 rings. Heck, going through these unskippable avatar rewards takes almost as much time as the level does to finish. That's not an exaggeration, it just takes a very, very, very long time. But on the flip side, when you're actually playing and can put whether you're in control out of your mind, it's usually fine. There's questionable level design at times, and the 2D segments bring up problematic elements that we'll talk about later, but hey, I like how fast the homing attack is now. It's just doo-doo-doo, it's great, I like it. I was going to use this paragraph to form like a list of compliments, but that's legitimately all I could think of. I don't think I like this game. Saying it's functional doesn't sound like high praise. I seriously went into this script wanting to balance out the positives and the negatives, but the positives just aren't coming to me, man. I'll talk more about modern Sonic in a bit, but let's quickly go over the other characters. Classic Sonic is back. Did anyone want this? We just had Mania, which was fantastic, and to be honest, Classic Sonic is good in Generations, but the highlight of the game was absolutely the modern Sonic design for me. Not saying those stages are bad, but these stages are so good. But yeah, he's here again, from another dimension this time rather than time travel, and again tampers with the purity of Sonic Mania by making this a direct sequel. Leave this precious game alone! Somehow, despite him playing fine in Generations, this is the worst part of the game. Classic Sonic controls like a rock. I mean, jumping is a problem for every character, which isn't great for a platformer, but Classic Sonic is easily the most frustrating of the lot. He is so heavy, and momentum doesn't work in any logical way. I was missing incredibly simple jumps just because I can't wrap my head around how he's meant to land. It's not like Sonic 4 where momentum doesn't make much sense, but it's still more than playable. No, this just feels bad. I don't think it was perfect in Generations, but they had something good. I just can't understand how it got downgraded this much. I mean, at least he's got the drop dash from Mania. That move should be a Sonic mainstay, and while there aren't many slopes at all to take advantage of, I mean, there's a lot of just straight paths that end in a jump that you can't just keep rolling. But either way, it's a great move. I'm happy it's here. And remember back a few minutes ago when I was complaining about modern Sonic's movement being scripted and sometimes changing? I know that was a long time ago now, I'm very sorry. But it applies here too. Watch how classic speed changes extremely unnaturally. I'm not doing this. He just suddenly changes like a car switching gear. And the level design doesn't even make any sense. Like, why is there a speed boost here? We're on a downward slope. It's like they thought we might suddenly lose all our memory and just decide to turn around and get lost. It doesn't make any sense. There's just speed boosts everywhere. It's nonsensical, and what's more nonsensical is there's hidden springs everywhere too. And it's not like the classic games where there's a clear dead end and you can't make that jump. No, they just put springs anywhere they want. I can make that jump. Why are you making it for me? Let me be in control, please. This one very specific moment made me very upset. You run down a slope, you do a loop-de-loop, you've got a ton of speed, but the scripting makes you lose it all, so you can't clear this little ramp. Every time. If you're gonna script everything, why wouldn't you script this so that you can make the ramp? It doesn't make any sense. Why ignore this part? Oh, and one stage puts classic Sonic on an auto-scroller with narrow platforms that are not only tedious to move around on with these controls, but the tilted perspective of 2.5D makes it really hard to perceive depth. Whose idea was it to do this? The game's mechanics are not good enough for precision platforming, but put it on an auto-scroller where you repeat huge chunks if you mess up, and it's just terrible. Finally, the Avatar. I kinda like this. I think diving into the Sonic fandom's passion for OCs was a genius move. I made Jet the Hawk, and he became more sex-positive as my playthrough went on. The Avatar is pretty much modern Sonic without the boost. They've got a grappling hook, which replaces the homing attack, but there are still issues of control being taken away here too. Like in Generations and Unleashed, we had the drift, which, if you could nail it, was an awesome feature. But I imagine the people who played like this probably spent most of the time in a wall. So now modern Sonic can't drift at all, but the Avatar can in very specific scripted moments. You don't decide when, you just get some good movement while being at a pretty fast speed, which to be honest, isn't bad. I'm not sure why modern Sonic doesn't have this himself, because that would have saved him from this. There's also a bunch of grappling hook sections where sometimes you have input and other times you do nothing at all. Cool. The unique part of the Avatar is the weapons, the Wispons. Yeah, Wisps are a mainstay now, I guess. A one-off gimmick in Colors, came back for Lost World, Forces, and even Team Sonic Racing. I thought they were fine in Colors. Didn't really want them to be the basis of the franchise, but sure. Wisp capsules are sprinkled around every Avatar level, but you can only use the one that correlates with your Wispon. So if I see the Electric Wisp, but I'm using the Fire Wisp, I can't use that, pretend it's not there. I mean, it can be good for encouraging customization and repeat playthroughs, but some levels just don't cater to specific Wispons. It's very weird, and to put this eloquently, other Wispons suck. The default burst one is really good at taking out enemies, and doesn't slow you down at all. Plus, the capsule gives you Sonic Colors DS powers, and I like anything that reminds me of this game. Sonic Colors DS rocks. But then there is Cube that stops all your movement and freezes a few nearby enemies. Boring. Drill is at least amusingly very broken, and you can skip huge chunks of levels. But yeah, Avatar isn't bad. I mean, perhaps it's quite samey feeling to Sonic, especially when many levels feel almost the exact same, but honestly, it's probably the best part of Forces. That White City level where Infinite occasionally comes in and switches the gravity is genuinely very good. I also quite like the music here. On my first playthrough, I thought nothing really of the soundtrack, but coming back, these lyrical pieces are pretty good. I mean, the modern soundtrack's just okay, and classic is not great, but the Avatar ones can be really good, and they've become the basis of Cyberspace and Sonic Frontiers. I'm pretty happy about that. There's some good stuff in here. Some levels have you playing as both modern and the Avatar teaming up together, almost like Sonic Heroes. Basically, if you boost, you control modern Sonic, and if you use a Wispon, you control the Avatar. It works fine. Although the double boost is very funny, there's scripted moments where you just mash down the boost button and then the game goes to a Apart from if you don't mash the button, it will just do it regardless. Yeah, mashing doesn't matter, you can ignore this. Also, while doing the double boost, the rings fuel your boost gauge, but they don't do that during a normal boost. They did in Unleashed and Generations, they didn't in Colors, and they don't here in Forces apart from the double boost. I'm so tired. These segments are nothing. They often come out of nowhere, and they don't need any input at all. You can't possibly fail them. But let's rewind to why I don't like how any of them jump. You ever noticed how inconsistent Sonic's been with jumping this last decade? Like Unleashed, regular nice floaty jump. Colors, double jump. Generations, regular nice floaty jump. Lost World, weak jump little flip double jump thing. Forces, double jump. And look, I am a weirdo who doesn't like double jumps in general, but the problem with these ones specifically is the level design is made around them. It's not just a little save to create your movement. Nah, because Sonic in Colors can move through the air more, we have a bunch of tiny platforms to jump on. Not only does it make the jump itself feel unsubstantial, but it's not particularly fun to bring a quick character to a halt to make these very tight and tiny jumps. And by the way, I like Sonic Colors, but I don't like these bits. What happened here? Forces does these very tight jumps too, but here is the big problem. Momentum is pretty damn busted. You know how differently Mario feels between like Arcade Mario Bros. And Super Mario Bros. 3? One's incredibly fixed and pretty rigid, and the other one has a ton of user input, right? And I'm not saying that Forces is like Arcade Mario Bros., but it is bad. Once you're in the air, there's very little you can do to get another burst of speed. I mean, you can boost, but that's a lot of speed, and that's not going to help you with platforming. It just feels so weak now. Even these jumps that should be really easy to do, I have no trust in them. The Avatar and Modern Sonic at least have these pity little double jumps to carry them a tiny bit further, but Classic Sonic has all these problems without the crutch of a double jump. He's just doomed. And just for reference, my favourite 3D Sonic jump is easily Adventure 1 or Adventure 2. Sonic's a quick guy, he needs a floatier jump to give him more control in the air, and needing a second jump feels like a failure of that first jump. Putting in a second jump does not fix a bad jump. The Forces jump has less problems in 3D, I'd say. I don't think I would even have thought about the limitations of the jump in that style if this was the entire game, especially with the emphasis on the homing attacks, though it's worth noting that in the more open 3D spaces, which are pretty rare, but in like this Zavok fight, the homing attack just doesn't work in this kind of space. It locks onto what's in front of it, and doesn't have any like 3D lock-on. It's weird they'll do a fight like this with a mechanic that doesn't really work around it. But anyway, that's a tangent. In my opinion, precision platforming really doesn't suit Boost Sonic, so it's odd when they focus so much on it rather than just breaking up the 3D pace. I think going 2D's fine, it can be a lot of fun, but not like this, Sonic Colors, and not like this, Sonic Forces. This is a game where the negatives just leave more of an impression than the positives. There aren't necessarily more bad parts than good parts, there's just very little that's remarkable enough to remember. It's a frustratingly basic game with no passion or ambition, and so when it's not being mid as flip, it's being bad, and that's probably what your mind will fixate on. Oh, and the final boss? I mean, spoilers I guess, if you don't want to see it, there's a timestamp to skip past this section. You there? Okay. It's Colors again! Why? Like, it was fine in Colors, but Sonic Team were like, man, what a rush! No one's ever gonna make a boss that good again! Let's bring it back for Lost World, and then bring it back again in Forces. You just run into it and homing attack when you're close, and that's it! I'm so confused why you do this repeatedly. Oh, and Egg Dragoon is back too, that one boss from Unleashed that came back for Generations, and is now in Forces. You can tell this game didn't have the time it needed to be finished, but I cannot tell if they legitimately just love this final boss. Was the game always planned to climax this way? Spoiler segment over. I'm shrugging, I'm confused, I don't get it. The other bosses in the game aren't exactly remarkable. I remember on my first playthrough I fought Infinite with the Electric Wispon, and that was a real chore, but this time I just used Burst, and damn, he's nothing! And most of the other bosses are pretty much the same fight, rinse and repeated. Like just running in a straight line until you get close enough to homing attack. This Infinite and this Metal Sonic fight are outright the exact same, and they're also pretty much the same as the final boss. And that Zavok fight from the start, I'm sorry to keep coming back to this, I don't want to talk about Zavok, I want to move on. But like, he slams down, and my instinct is to jump, to avoid that attack like a shockwave, like in Mario Galaxy or any other 3D platformer. But no, if you jump, he repeats the entire slow segment again. This very, very slow segment. What you're meant to do is just stand there. He'll launch you in the air, and then there's this scripted homing attack sequence. Sometimes you punch him, and when you beat him, the camera just kind of freezes there for a moment. I'm not sure the background animators intended you to really see these low frame rate animals, but it stays there for a very long time. The game's just going, go on, stare at our low frame rate animals. Look at what we made. And again, I don't want to focus on the story too much, other people have gone very in-depth into that, but my god, this is the worst action scene ever. But what about DLC, I hear you ask? Well, Supersonic is now a free download. Yeah, why go out of your way to get red rings? They don't matter, just download them. That's the real reward. Supersonic makes it incredibly easy to get S ranks, but it's also already incredibly easy to get S ranks, so who cares? But then there is Episode Shadow. This allows you to play as Shadow in most modern Sonic stages, and I think that's awesome. All the radio chatter and QuickTime events are disabled too, so if anything, this kinda speeds up the pace a little bit. But there's also 3 completely unique levels with a prequel story, and when I say 3 completely unique levels, I don't exactly mean that, they're only kinda different. There's only really one cutscene, the rest is just kind of radio chatter, but Episode Shadow is the origin story of Infinite. The game never really touches on who exactly this man is, so what's the mysterious origin behind this menacing villain? So, he was a normie Eggman mercenary who Shadow beat up and called weak. Like, he got really upset and said, well now, I'm gonna be infinite. That is the entire story of Episode Shadow. But I like when he did the legs apart double punch like in the Shadow the Hedgehog intro. That was kind of a cool callback. Playing as Shadow again is incredibly cool. I think a lot of people criticize the wrong thing when speaking negatively about Sonic's friends. Tails, Knuckles, and even characters like Gamma were always good and enabled interesting ways to reuse level assets. These characters weren't the problem, people just didn't want bad playstyles. It's a fine line. Shadow isn't really different to Sonic in any way, but it is cool to play as him again for the first time since Sonic and the Black Knight. And Sonic Team! I know you're not watching this, but I want to play as Tails in 3D again. It was good! Why has it barely been done? I recognize this one's more of a nitpick, but the overworld map is a really weird step back when they've done this right twice already. The story jumps all over the globe, so levels aren't lined up in a linear order, and there's no unique imagery beyond just color coding whether it's modern, classic, or the Avatar. Unleashed was pretty much the same, but it was so easy to tell which area was which. Heck, Adventure 2 did this back in the year 2000. I get they were trying to stick with the bold, 2-color black and red UI here, but this is very unintuitive to navigate. Sonic Forces is a game that had me saying, why, a lot. It's not always bad, but it's rarely coherent. I can forgive a lot of lesser Sonic games for at least having a clear vision and raw ambition, but I don't know what went on with Forces. It's certainly not ambitious, perhaps that's to be expected with the same formula being dug up for the 4th time, but it somehow plays worse than every other game it's borrowing from, especially Generations, which it borrows too much from. Namely, Classic Sonic. The mechanics aren't good enough for him to be here this time. It would have absolutely been a better game if he weren't here at all. And even the modern side. It's not just that I may be a bit tired of the boost formula, this is just an awful take on it. There are Sonic games with lower points than Forces, Sonic games with worse pacing, Sonic games that most people would probably rank worse than Forces. But I don't know, if there's a game that I just couldn't feel anything about, it's Forces. At its worst, it's incredibly flawed, and at its best, it's nothing. I think to me, that's worse than trying something ambitious and failing. I don't like Sonic Labyrinth, but I respect it more than Sonic Forces. It has an identity, it tries something new and unique. I don't respect Sonic Forces in that way. Forces got a higher metascore than Sonic 06, but I don't know man. It's a less broken game, but it absolutely isn't a more enjoyable one. If anything, I think the critical reception wasn't harsh enough on Forces. I realize we're now 5 years on from this, and if you were 10, then maybe this was your childhood game, and I'm sorry for besmirching your nostalgia. I do respect your memories, I'm kind of fascinated in hearing about those who have nostalgic memories for Forces. That said, I've tried giving it an open-minded chance, and I just don't like Sonic Forces, and I probably never will.
Cheer up, Tails. I'm sure we'll run into him again.
No. But to end on a positive note, here is Sonic Forces Reimagined, a mod that takes existing Forces stages, but aims to elaborate and expand upon ideas that the core game barely touches on. It may not completely fix Forces, but its level design is so much more ambitious than the base game. What was a fairly nothing romp is now something pretty exciting, so check it out if you've got the PC version. Anyway, I'm gonna sleep, this game's made me very sleepy. So, 5 years on, replaying Sonic Forces has not changed my mind. I used to consider this just a below average Sonic game, but now, if anything, it's far worse. I think that this is a poor game, and something that I don't want to play again anytime soon. I like most Sonic games. I think Sonic Shuffle can be an amusing game, but Sonic Forces is just so devoid of life and love. And while it's functional, it's technically fine, that's not good enough to be a good game. But anyway, Sonic Frontiers is coming up, and even if that game doesn't deliver, even if I'm disappointed by it, at least it did something. At least it had some kind of ambition, and I can't find myself not respecting that. So anyway, weird note to end on, but thank you for watching, and we'll see you soon for Sonic Frontiers. That's like a few weeks away, and of course, I'm going to talk about it for 20 to 30 minutes, maybe even 40, we'll see. Golly gee, you've watched the whole thing! Thank you so much. And if you're new to this channel, I am not usually this negative. I prefer to talk about my passions and things that I love. And Sonic is one of those things, and I wanted to give this game one final chance, but unfortunately, I just can't love it. But thank you to our patrons for making this video even possible.